Oh, there are so many places to dream about.
We can visit worlds that were, that could be, and those of fantasy and reality.
What's next, Dreamfinder?
Why, imagination can take us over the rainbow and to worlds beyond.
I bet I can use imagination to discover all kinds of new things.
Of course! It's your key to unlock the hidden wonders of our world.
That little clip you just heard came from the classic Disney attraction, Journey into Imagination. And what better way to describe imagination itself? It is the key that opens the bridge that would turn the ideas in our heads into reality. Sometimes it is used to introduce innovative inventions that we would go on to use in our regular lives. And sometimes it is used as a portal to look into one's imagination in order to tell a story. For the latter, I cannot think of a better example to do it than what actually rhymes with it: animation. But when it comes to imaginative animated features, there is this one portal that has fascinated millions by being the true definition of a world unlike any other. But funny enough, you cannot find this portal in any of the American animation studios. No, not in DreamWorks, not in Illumination, not in Warner Brothers, not in Blue Sky, not even in Disney and Pixar. No, this portal that I'm talking about can only be found in Japan, in a strange little building called Studio Ghibli. Now for this look back, we're taking a look at the studio back when the three masters of Ghibli were dominating the animation industry in the creative department. Some could even say that this was the time when Japanese animated features were at its finest. Hold on tight, dudes, because Animation Look Back is taking flight in the world of Studio Ghibli. Now let's start with one of the founding fathers of Ghibli, Isao Takahata. Born on October 29, 1935, he attended and graduated at the University of Tokyo in French literature. During that time, he discovered a rather interesting French animated feature that was unfinished at the time. That was Le Roi et l'Oiseau, or The King and the Mockingbird in English, and it was what inspired Takahata to pursue a career in animation. The first step he took was joining Toei Doga, now known as Toei Animation, in the early 60s as an assistant director. 4 years later, he met a young animator who was fresh out of college named Hayao Miyazaki. Their mentor, Yasuo Otsuka, decided that they would be ready to take on a big role for their next feature for the first time, with Takahata as the director and Miyazaki as the designer and key animator of the 1968 The Little Norse Prince, or Horus Prince of the Sun, or The Great Adventures of Horus Prince. Okay, you know what? I'll just call it by its real title, Taiyo no Oiji Horusu no Daiboken. However, the film ended up becoming a flop, and both Takahata and Miyazaki, along with some other staff, quit Toei in 1971. Later on, the two would find themselves working together on several different projects in studios like what is now known as Shin-Ei Animation and Nippon Animation, including Lupin III, Panda Go Panda, Heidi Girl of the Alps, Anne of Green Gables, and Pippi Longstocking. Which the last one didn't happen because the original author said no. But that's only how these two started in animation. This is actually just context. Our real story begins with this guy, Meet Toshio Suzuki, a young reporter who had to help start a new animation magazine called Animage in 1978. Funny enough, Suzuki didn't really have much knowledge in animation, but hey, guess it doesn't hurt to learn. His first job at Animage was to make an article on an animated classic, and he decided to look into Horusu. So he called up both Takahata and Miyazaki to talk about the movie, and he got absolutely nothing. Yeah,
They actually spent a whole hour talking about why they don't want to talk about it. Okay, let's try this again. 1 year later, Suzuki decided to contact Miyazaki again, this time to talk about his first animated feature that he directed, The Castle of Cagliostro. The results were better. At first, Miyazaki wanted to ignore him, but as time would move on, even after Suzuki made his article about Cagliostro, the two would become well acquainted with one another. One day, Miyazaki chatted with Suzuki about a dream movie he wanted to make, one whose concept sounded so extraordinary to Suzuki that he knew that this has to become a real feature film called Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Set in an apocalyptic future where it has been 1,000 years since the events of the 7 Days of Fire, the world is at total war with nature, battling giant insects and spores that send out toxic fumes in the air. One princess from the Valley of the Wind, however, Nausicaa, is on a pursuit to save everyone she loves, including the giant bugs, from the invading kingdom of Tolmika, while meeting new allies on her journey and to find the peaceful way to stop the invasion from both man and nature. After the chat Toshio Suzuki had with Miyazaki, he quickly made a pitch to the executives in the hopes to actually turn Miyazaki's dream into a movie. But they all ended up rejecting it without batting an eye. So what went wrong? Well, you see, in Japan, one does not simply make an original animated feature. It has to tie in with another form of media like a manga in order to give it some promotion. Well, if it's a manga they want, then it's a manga they'll get. Miyazaki went straight to work on turning his vision in comic form, and the first issue was released in Animage with the help of Suzuki on February 1982. As the number of issues would rise, so does the popularity of Nausicaa, with many claiming that it's one of the best serials ever published in Animage. And because of this, a year later, they got the green light to go and turn the first 2 volumes of the manga into a Nausicaa movie, starting production on May 31st, 1983. The news was so big, even Isao Takahata returned to Hayao Miyazaki to be an executive producer of the film. Oh, by the way, the two haven't seen each other since Miyazaki quit Nippon Animation in 1979. But anyways, with the dynamic duo back together, they settled in a small animation studio called Topcraft, and immediately grabbed the attention of the top animators in Japan. It really does help when Suzuki is also working on his part to promote the film through Animage. But even with the best talents, it doesn't mean that things were going smoothly. Due to Miyazaki's major demands, it would happen quite frequently that they would fall behind schedule, resulting them to find more animators. One young man, however, Hideaki Anno, immediately came into the studio to show what he's got to work on Nausicaa. Miyazaki really liked his potential and gave him on the spot the crazy task of animating the Great Warrior. The result was extraordinary to everyone, and Anno would go on to make the landmark Japanese animated franchise, Neon Genesis Evangelion. When it was released on March 11th, 1984, the movie was an immediate smash hit, making almost 1.5 billion yen and sold almost 1 million tickets, along with earning some very good reviews. In 1985, New World Pictures released an English version of the movie called Warriors of the Wind, and the result was just downright embarrassing. The movie was heavily edited to be more for kids. Names like Nausicaa were changed to Princess Xandra. It cut almost 22 minutes of the film, losing the movie's original narrative, and it has the most nonsensical poster in contrast to the movie. Alright, seriously, let's just examine this for a moment. Okay, so we got Nausicaa shoved off on the side because I guess she doesn't matter that much. And I see there's Asbel in the middle, who looks like is riding the Great Warrior, with another Great Warrior right next to Asbel for some reason. I don't know who the fridge this guy is, and this guy is completely in the wrong movie. As you can guess, Miyazaki was not happy with this version and decided for every foreign release of his film, he would enforce a strict no-edit rule. But luckily, in 2005, Disney would release an uncut English dub of the film that would include an all-star cast, including Patrick Stewart as Lord Yupa, Uma Thurman as Kushana, Shia LaBeouf as Asbel, and many more. The movie would go on to be a major influence in several projects, especially in video games, where some use the designs of the Ohm as inspiration to make their giant enemy bugs. And even Hironobu Sakaguchi said that the film and manga were influences to the Final Fantasy games. As for the manga, Miyazaki kept on making more volumes even after he finished the film. Whenever he was not working on movies, he was working on the Nausicaa comics, going for a total of 59 chapters in 7 volumes and ending it off on December 1994. After the great success of Nausicaa, the 3 heads of the movie, Miyazaki, Takahata, and Suzuki, all agreed that they want to keep this ball rolling, that they want to make more animated features. So they all got together and decided to create their own animation studio. But what can they call it? Well, Miyazaki got an idea. You see, he's actually a really big fan of airplanes, which explains why he features them quite frequently in his movies. One plane that he remembered was an Italian World War II observation plane called the Caproni CA-309 Ghibli, which was named after the Italian word for the hot winds that came out of the Sahara Desert. So with the way that Miyazaki wanted to blow the animation industry into a whole new direction, he decided that the perfect name for the studio will be Studio Ghibli.
ジブリなんて困ってさ飛行機の名前で思いついてジブリとか言ったんだから有名したからね
Or it could have no relevance whatsoever and it's just a name, and it could be that too. On a side note, I'm sure that a lot of people are confused about the actual pronunciation, if it's either Ghibli or Ghibli. Well, it's kinda complicated, but here's the thing. In the original Italian word, the GHI is pronounced with a hard G, being Ghibli. But in Japanese, the GHI is pronounced with a soft G, being Ghibli. Technically, it's a mistake on Miyazaki's part, but in case that you want to refer to the Japanese animation studio, the right way to say it is Ghibli. But even if you say Ghibli, I'll get what you mean. I'm not gonna judge. I mean, I'm not the internet. But moving along, in 1986, Studio Ghibli officially made their debut with Castle in the Sky. It's the story of Patsu, a young, hard-working orphan who dreams of finding the legendary floating island of Lapida. His dream wouldn't set sail until he found a girl named Shita who gently floated down after falling from an airship. So now Patsu has to find Lapida while also saving Shita from the government and some crazy air pirates. For the design of Lapida, it was inspired by the Castle Paranella Park, located in Mina Creek at far north Queensland in Australia. In fact, if you visit the real castle now during the night tours, you'll actually hear the music from the movie. As for the Castle in the Sky itself, Miyazaki based it off of the levitating island of the same name from Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels. In fact, the original English title was Laputa, Castle in the Sky. But he then realized there was something awfully wrong with the name. You see, Laputa, or in another pronunciation, La Puta, is actually Spanish for the whore. Because of this, the title had to be shortened to just Castle in the Sky in several countries, especially those that speak Spanish, like in the US, Mexico, and Spain. Miyazaki did apologize right afterwards and swore that he never knew about it and that the name Laputa was meaningless in English and Japanese anyways. Funny enough though, the movie is still called Laputa Castle in the Sky in the UK and Australia. Another case of controversial names in the movie, but this time the bullet was dodged, was purposely misspelling Sheeta in Disney's English dub. In the Japanese romanization of the word Sheeta, there is supposed to be an I instead of a double E. But I think you guys can perfectly understand why they can't be accurate with it. When it was released on August 2nd, 1986, the movie became a massive success both critically and financially. A few years later, an English dub was made for Japan Airlines and it was released in US theaters by Streamline Pictures. Although the head of the company, Carl McKeck, wasn't really a fan of the English version, Streamline would go on to do the English dubs of a couple more Miyazaki films, which you'll find out what as they come. Nowadays, the only way you can get the version is through the Japanese DVD of the film. Interestingly enough, even if I mentioned before about Miyazaki's strict no edits rule, Disney actually made a few changes of their own in their 1999 English dub from the original Japanese version. These include making Patsu and Sheeta sound older, take away any references of Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island as well as Swift's Gulliver's Travels, fill in the silence with background noises, new sound effects, and one-liners, have the Dola gang love Sheeta instead of seeing her as a mother figure, and have composer Joe Hisaishi make a new extended 90-minute soundtrack piece to make it more accustomed for US audiences. Even if critics have questioned Disney for these changes, they were actually approved by Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki himself. But then later, for the 2010 DVD re-release and the 2012 Blu-ray version, a lot of these changes were removed to be closer to the original. All the extra dialogue and sound effects were removed, and the original 39-minute soundtrack Hisaishi did returned. On August 3rd, 2013, Japan completely went nuts when it aired on TV, and broke a new record on Twitter for the most tweeted moment in history, reaching a peak of 143,199 tweets per second. 2 years later, Miyazaki would make a film that was not only something he wanted to make for 10 years, but also would become the studio's biggest icon, My Neighbor Totoro. It's about the simple life of Satsuki and Mei, who just moved into an old house with their dad so that they could be closer to their sick mom in the hospital. While settling in, they would often encounter some strange and magical bunny-like creatures, including a big one named Totoro. Believe it or not, a part of this movie is actually autobiographical. No, Hayao Miyazaki did not need a giant bunny at the bus stop, but it was the factor that during his childhood with his brothers, his mom had to spend a lot of time in the hospital because she had spinal tuberculosis for 9 years. In fact, the movie even hinted that Satsuki and Mei's mom had tuberculosis. Miyazaki even mentioned that the main characters had to be little girls because it would be too emotional for him if they were boys. Speaking of the girls, the movie was supposed to have one 7-year-old girl as the main character. This was evident through the original poster where just one girl is waiting for the bus with Totoro. But when Miyazaki wanted to incorporate some suspense in the second half, only having her just didn't work. The solution to this was to split the girl in half into a 10 and 4-year-old, along with giving them some of her elements, like her clothes went to Satsuki and her hairstyle went to Mei. For the name Totoro, it came from a mispronunciation of the Japanese word for troll, which is Totoru, said by Mei.
I saw Totoro. Totoro? You mean a troll, like the one in your storybook? Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, this was only done in the Japanese version and Disney's 2005 English dub. The 1993 Streamline English dub took that part out, believing that English-speaking audiences wouldn't get it. When art director Kazuo Oga signed into Totoro, Miyazaki told him to really raise his standards. The result led to some incredible work, successfully capturing the mixture of modern Japanese life and the supernatural. This not only jump-started Oga's career, but it also became Ghibli's signature style. Originally, the movie was supposed to be just an hour long, but was later extended to give more context of the movie. including the reason why the family had to move and what does Sasuke and Mei's dad do for a living. When it was released on April 16th, 1988, it wasn't really much of a commercial success since it didn't make its money back until a couple years later when they sold some Totoro plushies. On the plus side, it did earn some massive acclaim, with Roger Ebert calling it one of the lovingly handcrafted works of Hayao Miyazaki, and that it would never have won its worldwide audience just because of its warm heart. It is also rich with human comedy, in the way it observes the two remarkably convincing lifelike little girls. In 1993, Streamline Pictures released their English dub of the film under the title My Friend Totoro, and it was co-produced by Streamline co-founder and animation historian Jerry Beck, while distributed by 20th Century Fox and Troma Films under the 50th Street Films banner. Then, Disney released their English dub in 2005, which features Dakota and Elle Fanning as Satsuki and Mei, who are actually 6 and 10 years younger than the movie itself, respectively. In 2002, Miyazaki made a 13-minute sequel of the film called Mei and the Kitten Bus, where Mei goes off on an adventure with the offspring of the cat bus, while also meeting Totoro and the mother of all cat buses, Granny Cat. The original voice of Mei, Chika Sakamoto, returned to do the voice while Miyazaki lent his voice to the Granny Cat and Totoro, and the short was made as an exclusive to the Ghibli Museum. For the 2005 Expo in Japan, they made a full-scale replica of Satsuki and Mei's house in Nagoya that is still quite a popular tourist attraction among Ghibli fans. As Totoro's popularity would rise, he would make some cameos in some of Ghibli's later films and in some American works, including Drawn Together, South Park, The Powerpuff Girls, and of course, Toy Story 3 as one of Bonnie's toys. But that's not all. Totoro even got a main belt asteroid named after him as the 10160 Totoro, as well as a velvet worm in Vietnam called Eo Peripatus Totoro. Later on, the praise for the movie would become so big that it would frequently find itself in many top lists, not just for animated films, but also for the greatest films ever made, including number 41 in Empire's 100 Best Films of World Cinema. Totoro himself is at number 24 on IGN's Top 25 Anime Characters, number 3 in Time Out's 100 Best Animated Movies, and even number 1 on Terry Gilliam's Greatest Animated Films. But even with those rankings, the greatest prize that Totoro has ever earned was becoming the official mascot of Studio Ghibli.